It was 2:13 a.m. when Aaron got the ping on his Rideshare app. The request was from a remote location on the outskirts of the city, where the streetlights were sparse and the roads were narrow and winding. Aaron, a seasoned night shift driver, hesitated. Trips from isolated areas always gave him the creeps, but the high surge price was hard to resist. As his car rolled through the foggy streets, the air seemed unnaturally heavy. He reached the pin on the app, a desolate intersection with a broken street lamp flickering overhead. No one was there. Aaron tapped the horn and waited. The mist parted slightly and 4 figures emerged from the darkness. They were dressed oddly, formal, almost outdated clothing. A man in a black suit with a pocket watch, a young woman in a flowing white dress, a middle-aged woman with a wide-brimmed hat, and a teenage boy wearing suspenders. They climbed into the car without a word, the man in the suit taking the front passenger seat while the others piled into the back. Hi, Aaron said nervously, checking the app. The destination was listed as Eldon Hollow Cemetery. Looks like we're heading to Eldon Hollow? The man in the suit nodded. That's correct. Aaron cleared his throat, trying to shake the unease. Kind of an odd place to go this late. Not for us, the man replied, his tone clipped and emotionless. The drive began in silence, the only sounds the hum of the engine and the occasional squawk of the GPS. Aaron tried to make small talk to lighten the mood. So, you all coming from a party or something? He asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. The young woman in the white dress turned her head slowly toward him, her pale face illuminated by the soft glow of the dashboard. A celebration, you could say. Oh, nice, Aaron replied, trying to ignore the chill creeping down his spine. What kind of celebration? A funeral, she said flatly. Aaron chuckled awkwardly, thinking she was joking, but her blank expression told him otherwise. He swallowed hard and focused on the road. They were driving through a wooded area when Aaron noticed the teenage boy staring intently out the window. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken. Are we close? The boy asked suddenly, his voice sharp and urgent. Aaron glanced at the GPS. Not really, still about 15 minutes away. The boy's lips curled into a bitter smile. I hope we make it there this time. Aaron furrowed his brow. What do you mean? The boy didn't answer. Instead, the middle-aged woman in the wide-brimmed hat spoke. The last driver didn't get us there, she said, her tone matter-of-fact. Aaron's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Last driver? What are you talking about? He panicked. The man in the suit said from the front seat. We had to let him go. Aaron's heart raced. Let him go? What does that mean? Don't worry, the man said, his tone calm but menacing. As long as you don't make the same mistake, you'll be fine. The GPS began glitching, the maps spinning erratically. The estimated arrival time reset to 30 minutes, then 45, then an hour. Great, Aaron muttered, smacking the screen. The signal out here sucks. He glanced out the window and his stomach dropped. The same stretch of road seemed to repeat endlessly. The same bent tree, the same cluster of rocks, the same broken fence post. Are we going in circles? Aaron asked, panic creeping into his voice. It's the only way, the young woman said cryptically. The path must loop before we can reach the end. What the hell does that mean? Aaron snapped. The living don't usually understand, she replied, her tone almost sympathetic. Aaron slammed on the brakes. The car screeched to a halt and the passengers didn't flinch. He turned to the man in the suit, his voice shaking. Look, I don't know what kind of prank this is, but I'm done. Get out of my car. The man in the suit stared at him, unblinking. We can't get out. Not until we reach our destination. The tension in the car was suffocating as Aaron reluctantly resumed driving. His hands trembled on the wheel, his mind racing for a way out. He glanced in the rearview mirror, and his breath caught in his throat. The passengers were changing. The young woman's white dress was stained with dirt, her face now gaunt and hollow. The teenage boy's eyes were sunken, his skin gray and ashen. The middle-aged woman's hat had fallen, revealing a cracked skull. And the man in the suit, his once pristine face was now riddled with decay, his jaw hanging slightly askew. Aaron's scream echoed through the car. What are you? The man in the suit turned to him, his voice calm but echoing with unnatural resonance. We're passengers, and you, driver, are taking us to where we belong. I'm not doing this, Aaron shouted, slamming the brakes again. I'm not going anywhere. The man leaned closer, his cold, decayed breath brushing Aaron's ear. "You already are." The road twisted and turned unnaturally, the woods outside becoming darker and more oppressive. Finally, the car pulled into a clearing. The sign at the gate read, Eldon Hollow Cemetery. Aaron's hands were shaking uncontrollably as the passengers exited the car, one by one. Their movements were slow and deliberate, their forms flickering like old film footage. The man in the suit paused at the open door. "You've done well," he said, his voice echoing. "But your journey isn't over yet." "What does that mean?" Aaron stammered. The man smiled, a grotesque, decayed smile. "You'll find out soon enough." With that, he shut the door, and the passengers disappeared into the mist. Aaron sat frozen, his heart pounding. The cemetery was silent, the fog suffocating. He started the car, desperate to leave, but the engine wouldn't turn over. The headlights flickered, then died. And then, in the darkness, he heard it, a knock on the window. "Another ride, driver?" a voice whispered. Aaron turned, but no one was there. The knocking grew louder, coming from all sides. A chorus of voices joined the first, chanting in unison, "Drive, drive, drive." The car filled with icy air, and Aaron screamed as the shadows closed in. The next morning, Aaron's car was found abandoned at the cemetery gate. The engine was cold, the doors locked. There was no sign of Aaron, but the Rideshare app on his phone was still open. The destination read, "Unknown." The Johnson family, Mark, his wife Linda, and their teenage daughter Emily, were returning from a peaceful weekend getaway in the countryside. The rain had begun as a drizzle, but quickly turned into a torrential downpour, hammering against the windshield and blurring the winding road ahead. Highway 63 cut through miles of dense forest, and the world outside seemed desolate, swallowed by the storm. "Slow down, Mark," Linda said, gripping the door handle. "The visibility is terrible." "I'm going as slow as I can," Mark replied, his voice tense. "This highway is so narrow it feels like it's closing in." In the back seat, Emily groaned, her earbuds in place. "Ugh, why couldn't we have left earlier? I have like zero signal out here." Mark rolled his eyes but said nothing. He squinted at the dark road, the windshield wipers working overtime. Suddenly, the car shuddered, sputtered, and then coasted to a stop. "What now?" Linda asked, panic creeping into her voice. Mark tapped the gas pedal, but the car didn't respond. The dashboard lights flickered, then died entirely. "The engine just died," Mark said. "I don't know what's wrong." Linda grabbed her phone, but the screen displayed no service. She held it up to the window, angling it for a bar of signal, but it was useless. "Great," Emily muttered, tugging her hoodie tighter. "We're in the middle of nowhere, and it's pouring." Mark turned to his family, forcing a smile. "Let's not panic. We'll figure it out. Maybe there's a house nearby. We just need a landline." "Do those even exist anymore?" Emily quipped. The rain showed no signs of letting up as the family stepped out of the car, their jackets doing little to keep them dry. The forest was unnervingly quiet, save for the sound of raindrops and the occasional rustling of leaves. They walked along the highway, the flashlight from Mark's phone cutting through the fog. After about 20 minutes, Linda spotted something through the trees. "Over there. Is that a light?" Sure enough, a faint, flickering glow was visible in the distance. The family veered off the road, trudging through the muddy underbrush until the outline of an old house emerged. It stood in a small clearing, its sagging roof and peeling paint barely visible in the storm. "I don't like this," Emily said, shivering. "It looks like something out of a horror movie." "It's shelter," Mark said, stepping up to the front porch. He knocked on the door. "Hello, is anyone home?" No answer. He knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. "Maybe it's abandoned," Linda suggested. Mark tried the doorknob and it creaked open. Inside, the house smelled of mildew and damp wood. The dim glow they'd seen came from a candle sitting on a table in the foyer, its flame flickering unnaturally despite the lack of a draft. "Creepy," Emily muttered, staying close to her mother. "It's better than staying out in the rain," Mark said. "Let's just make it through the night. We'll figure out the car in the morning." The family settled into the living room, its ancient furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. Mark found a stack of firewood near the hearth and managed to start a fire. The warmth was welcome, but the atmosphere remained unsettling. "Who lights a candle and leaves?" Linda wondered aloud. glancing around nervously. Emily sat on a moth-eaten couch, scrolling her phone. Still no signal. Awesome. As the rain continued to pound against the windows, strange noises began to punctuate the storm. A faint creak upstairs, the soft rustle of movement behind the walls. "Did you hear that?" Linda asked, sitting up straight. Mark shrugged. "Old house, probably settling." Emily looked toward the staircase, her unease growing. "Or, ghosts." Linda shot her a look. "Don't start." But as the night wore on, the noises grew louder, a slow, deliberate creaking like footsteps on the floor above. Mark stood, grabbing the flashlight. "I'll check it out," he said, heading toward the stairs. "Mark, wait," Linda said, but he was already climbing. The staircase groaned under his weight, each step seeming to echo unnaturally. At the top, the hallway was shrouded in darkness. He opened the first door he came to and found a small bedroom. A rocking chair sat in the corner, swaying gently as though someone had just risen from it. Mark's flashlight flickered. "Hello? Is someone here?" No answer. The air was thick and cold, and Mark's instincts screamed at him to leave. He turned and hurried back downstairs. "Anything?" Linda asked when he returned. "Nothing," Mark lied. "Just the wind." As midnight approached, the family tried to sleep, but the uneasy atmosphere made rest impossible. Linda and Emily dozed fitfully on the couch while Mark sat by the fire, keeping watch. Then he heard it, a faint humming, drifting through the house like a breeze. It was soft and melodic, almost like a lullaby, but it carried a sinister undertone that made his skin crawl. He nudged Linda awake. "Do you hear that?" Linda sat up, her face pale. "Where is it coming from?" Emily stirred, rubbing her eyes. "What's going on?" The humming grew louder, joined by the sound of footsteps above. Then abruptly, the fire went out, plunging the room into darkness. Emily screamed as the candle in the foyer flared brighter, casting long, twisted shadows on the walls. A figure appeared at the top of the stairs, a tall, gaunt silhouette with glowing eyes. "Get out," it hissed, its voice deep and unnatural. Mark grabbed his family and bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The figure descended the stairs slowly, its movements jerky and unnatural. "You shouldn't have come here," it growled. Linda screamed, fumbling with the lock. "It won't open." Mark picked up a chair and smashed it against the window. The glass shattered, and the family scrambled out into the rain. They ran through the woods, slipping in the mud, the sound of the figure's laughter echoing behind them. When they finally reached the highway, they flagged down a passing truck. The driver pulled over, his face pale as they recounted their story. "You were in that house?" he asked, his voice trembling. "No one's lived there in 50 years. People who go in don't come out." The Johnsons never spoke of that night again, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Late at night, she sometimes heard the faint sound of humming, as though the house, and whatever waited inside, was still calling her back.
James first saw her on a rainy October evening when the streets were deserted, and the dim street lights cast ghostly reflections in the puddles. Seeking refuge from the downpour, he stumbled into an old coffee shop at the edge of town. It wasn't on any map he'd ever seen. A relic from a bygone era, with dust-covered shelves and faded wallpaper peeling at the edges. Inside, it was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of an out-of-tune jukebox. That's when he saw her. She was sitting by the window, her pale face framed by long, raven black hair. She wore a vintage dress that looked like it belonged to another century, and her presence seemed to command the room despite its emptiness. Their eyes met, and James felt an icy chill ripple through him, like the sudden plunge into deep, dark water. "Come join me," she said, her voice soft but unnervingly compelling. James hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to turn and leave, but his feet betrayed him, carrying him to her table. Her smile deepened, though it didn't quite reach her eyes that seemed far too hollow, too knowing. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, though James couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Elise, as she introduced herself, seemed to know things about him he hadn't shared. His struggles as a writer, his loneliness, and even the dreams that had been haunting him for weeks. "You've been looking for something," she said cryptically, stirring a cup of tea she never sipped. "Or maybe, someone." Her words felt like a hook sinking deep into his chest. He didn't ask how she knew these things. He was too entranced to question. When they parted that night, she pressed a delicate hand to his, her touch cold enough to make him flinch. "Find me again," she whispered. "I'll always be waiting." James couldn't stay away. The next evening, he returned to the coffee shop, and there she was, sitting in the exact same spot as if she'd never left. Their dates became a nightly ritual. Walks through shadowy streets, conversations that felt simultaneously intimate and surreal. Elise avoided crowded places, leading him instead to forgotten corners of the town, an abandoned railway station where the air smelled of rust and decay, a crumbling library filled with cobweb books, and a decrepit churchyard where the headstones bore names he vaguely recognized. The nights grew darker, colder. James found himself waking in the dead of night to strange sounds. A faint knocking at his window, whispers that seemed to seep from the walls. Once, he swore he saw a figure standing in the corner of his room, watching him. When he turned on the light, it was gone. Elise's quirks became more unsettling. She never ate or drank, no matter how much he insisted. When he tried to take photos of her, she wasn't in them. And whenever he asked about her past, she would only say, "Some stories are too tragic to tell." One night, Elise invited him to take a walk in the woods. The air was heavy with fog, the trees looming like twisted sentinels. She led him deeper and deeper until they reached a clearing where an old, charred house stood. Its windows were shattered, the walls blackened with soot. James stopped, his breath catching in his throat. "This is where I live," Elise said, her voice carrying a strange echo. James hesitated. "Elise, this place, it looks like it's been abandoned for decades." "It has," she replied, her tone calm but chilling. "Ever since the fire." "What fire?" he asked, his voice trembling. She turned to him, her face pale as moonlight, her expression unreadable. "The one that took me." Before James could respond, a sound echoed from within the house, a low, guttural groan that seemed to vibrate through the air. The windows rattled as if something inside was desperate to escape. "Elise," James said, stepping back, "what's going on?" "You came here because you saw me," she said, her voice soft but relentless. "Because you could feel me. I've been waiting, James. Waiting for someone like you." She stepped closer, and for the first time, James noticed her shadow, or rather the absence of it. The moonlight cast no outline beneath her feet. James fled that night, refusing to answer her calls. But Elise wouldn't let him go. Over the next few days, she appeared everywhere. In the corners of mirrors, in the reflections of windows, even in the flicker of the TV when he tried to distract himself. Her whispers filled his apartment, her laughter curling through the air when he was alone. One night, as he lay in bed, the temperature in his room plummeted. His breath fogged in the icy air, and the shadows in the corners seemed to writhe and shift. Then he heard it, a faint tapping at his window. He lived on the second floor. Summoning every ounce of courage, James turned to look. Elise was there, her face pressed against the glass, her eyes wide and unblinking, her smile stretched unnaturally wide. "Let me in, James," she said, her voice distorted, as if coming from a broken radio. "We belong together." He screamed and turned away, but when he looked back, she was gone. Desperate, James sought answers. He researched the old house in the woods and discovered a story that made his blood run cold. Decades ago, a fire had consumed the home, killing the young woman who lived there. Her name was Elise. According to the legend, her spirit lingered, luring unsuspecting men into the woods, where they were never seen again. Terrified, James vowed to confront her. He returned to the woods one final time, clutching a flashlight and a rosary he'd bought from an antique shop. The house loomed ahead, more menacing than ever. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of burnt wood and something far worse, rot and decay. "Elise!" he shouted. "I know what you are. Show yourself." The door slammed shut behind him, and the room plunged into darkness. Her laughter echoed from every direction, low and guttural, transforming into a deafening roar. "You can't leave me, James," her voice whispered, chillingly close to his ear. "You're mine. Forever." The flashlight flickered, and James turned to see her standing inches away, her face twisted into something monstrous, eyes black voids, her mouth stretching impossibly wide to reveal rows of jagged teeth. The last thing he heard was her laughter as the darkness swallowed him whole. Weeks later, another man walked into the old coffee shop on a rainy evening. He noticed a beautiful woman sitting by the window, her pale face framed by the dim light of a street lamp. "Come join me," she said, smiling.
Thank you for watching. If you found these stories gripping and want to hear more tales of survival, mystery, and true crime, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new video, because the next story might just leave you speechless. Stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next one.